everyone, and welcome to the second episode in our How to Write mini-series. If you haven't already listened, do check out our first episode with Tyson Seaburn, who spoke about writing inclusive materials. In today's episode, I'm so excited to be speaking to someone whose work I've personally admired for a long time, and the author of ELT Teacher to Writer's How to Write Primary Materials, Katherine Bilsborough. Hi Kath, how are you?
Hello, Billy. I'm very well, thanks.
Good
to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and to chat to us today.
My pleasure. It's really nice to do a bit of socialising.
It is, isn't it? It doesn't happen very often when you work from home. So let's get started with hearing a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Okay, so my name's Katherine Bilsborough and I'm more or less 100% freelance writer these days. So I do some teacher training and I do also do some voluntary teaching. And I've been living in Spain since 1987. Mm-hmm. I came over for a year after doing my prep cert. Mm-hmm. And obviously things went well because I'm still here.
Nice.
And at the moment I live in the north of Spain, in a little village in the mountains, very quiet, working from home, and that's about it, really. I've been teaching, obviously, for a long time, and I think it's important, if you write materials, to continue to teach.
Definitely.
In some capacity. It doesn't have to be a regular classroom. It can be a couple of one-off sessions. It can be teacher training. It can be something in your community. But that's something I've learned. Yeah, I've had a couple of periods when I haven't been teaching, and I've noticed the difference in, I don't know about the quality of my work, but I think that when you're in contact with, when you're actually teaching, you keep being aware of new things and definitely. reminded of things that you might have forgotten.
Yeah, and I guess you, like, if you just write materials all the time and you don't really come face to face with the students that are using it, you sort of lose sight in a way of maybe what's happening, like, with students, because things are changing so quickly as well. Maybe things that worked or things that we discussed before, maybe they've changed now. So do you teach online sometimes, or do you teach face to face, or is it just a couple of classes here and there?
Both of those things. That's an interesting question, actually, because when people started teaching more online before the pandemic, mm-hmm. And I hadn't really done a lot of teaching online except for doing some webinars and a couple of teacher training courses. Mm-hmm. And when I started thinking about materials that would be used for online teaching, I realized that I hadn't taught a class of children, for example, online. So I set one up, and I realized at that moment how overambitious I might have been in some of the suggestions I was making in my materials, and how I had to sort of step back a little bit and slow down a little bit, and how it's a total different ball game. And I also realized what an amazing job teachers have been doing in the pandemic, having large classes sometimes and all kinds of tech issues. It was quite humbling, actually. So I'm continuing. I've got one small group of children that I continue to teach online. Mm-hmm. And it's great because now I've got my head around it, and it's helped me with writing, because one thing that's changed in terms of writing these days is that very often we have to consider how the materials might work as digital materials or online context, whereas before there was much less of that.
True. So I can imagine it's very, very hard to teach a group of young learners or primary learners online. Is that what you were doing? Were they that age group?
Yeah, I had a bit of a mixed age bunch, actually, because it's local kids who, so the youngest I've had was 5, but mm-hmm. the oldest was about 15.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah. but they kind of helped each other and supported each other. And sometimes the younger ones had ideas that were able to help the older ones because they'd had more support themselves, and they were able to then teach the others what they'd learned in terms of how to go about doing something. Or which was, it was it's great fun.
Great. So today we're talking about primary materials. So what sort of age group, when we're referring to primary, perhaps young learners as well, like what sort of age group is that? And then how might that differ from writing for teens and adults?
Okay, so primary starts at 5 years old.
Okay.
In some countries, the child might all be 4 and about to turn 5, but they start. It's basically 5, and then it goes up to 11 or 12 again, depending on the country, really. And that's one of the major things that you need to know about primary, because obviously 5 and 6 year olds are hugely different from 10 and 11 year olds, 12 year olds, because there's not all primary students are the same. Exactly. So the progress, if you like, from primary 1 up to primary 6, which is what we usually work in 6 levels, is immense. So the main difference from writing for primary rather than teenagers or adults, and it's the same when it comes to teaching really, is that we have to be aware of the children's cognitive development. So in the early years especially, we can't just expect them to do the same kind of things as we might expect teenagers to do. So for example, they will be learning at the same time how to write, how to read, how to hold a pencil. Yeah.
True,
So the earlier years especially, the materials need to be very, very much brought into line with their development in terms of human beings. So of course, that's the biggest thing. Also their worlds are a lot smaller. So you might be able to write materials for teenagers where you are getting them to think about things that are in a larger global context. But with primary children, their world is usually their home, their classroom, possibly their town or just their street. They don't have that idea about the big wide world in the same way. Obviously, as they get older, they start to understand those concepts, of spatial concepts, and so that's another thing. And I think as well we need to keep in mind, I mean, teachers of primary children are caregivers, as they're not only teaching the language, they're looking after the well-being of the child in the classroom. So that comes through in materials sometimes. So when we talk, we might write some materials that need some teacher support, where we can say how to go about actually managing the children. I mean, I know we have classroom management, right the way through, but with children, you can't assume. I would say assume nothing when it comes to children. One big mistake I made, for example, when I was teaching primary for the first time and creating my own materials, I decided to do something crafty, because they love art and crafts and this projects and making things. And so we did a simple craft, and it was they were like little boxes that had it was like a fish tank made from a little box, basically, where they had to use different vocabulary, etc., etc. And I made the huge mistake of thinking it was a good idea to get them to do this in pairs. And of course, I didn't really think it through, because there were lots of tears at the end of it all, because they all wanted to take them home.
Oh, that's true. Yes, yeah.
And even when it came to, well, you have it for a week and then bring it back, and then that, everyone wanted to be first. And I think we got rounded by having a kind of classroom display and inviting the parents in, but that was somebody, my senior teacher, saying, like, you've really, done something silly there. So there's that whole thing that they're very me orientated.
Yeah. That's something
So all the materials.
Yeah,
you wouldn't think of it, would you?
No, not at all, because in ELT generally you want students to work in pairs and groups. You encourage collaborative learning, but I guess with primary learners it's completely different. Yeah, you'd have to consider that.
Yeah, pair work. I'm a huge fan of pair work in every context, where it's possible. But with children, you really do have to think very carefully about how you're setting it up and how you make sure that whatever you do is weighted equally. So you might do the same activity twice just to let them exchange roles, because they'll, even if you think it's all fair, there'll come a point where they'll say that's not fair, and they'll tell you. So the materials writer needs to be, I suppose, putting themselves in the shoes of those children as much as possible and preempting potential problems, because a lot of the materials that we write get used by inexperienced teachers, new teachers. So there needs to be as much support as possible within the materials, and we need to keep, I always say, we need to keep the end users in mind, and that is the children, but also the teachers who are going to be using these materials.
Of course.
But they're the big differences. And values as well. Values is values has always existed, I think, in materials, especially for this age group. We've called them different things over the years, but we need to make sure that we're also building in opportunities for things like learning how to share, how to show empathy, how to show tolerance, basic things, but things that can come through the materials and help develop the child in those ways.
And if a materials writer specifically, rather than a teacher creating materials, if a materials writer was writing for primary, would they be briefed in beforehand that they would have to include those things, or would that be something that the writer would have to consider themselves?
If you were writing materials for a publisher, then they would have a list. It would be part of the scope and sequence document, which is the document that you write before you write the course. So it's like a big table with the numbers of units, the topics, the themes, the vocabulary, the grammar, maybe phonics, maybe, depending on the course, different things go into that document. And one of them will be a list of those values, because especially in recent years, there's been a move towards having them on the page of the children's books, of the class book, not only as part of the teacher's book, if you like, so that the children read them or see a picture and react. And it's much more explicitly a part of it's a selling point as well, because a lot of curriculums around the world have realized that this is a vital part of the children's education, and they get put into other subjects materials as well. It's not only English. So somebody teaching PE, for example, if they have materials, or science, whatever, they'll have these values within their and there's a long list of them. There are lists of them that publishers come up with, and basically they're common sense. They're how to be a good human being, how to be a citizen, how to live with others, look after your belongings, respect other people, this kind of thing.
Definitely, yeah. Just touching on what you said, what we were talking about earlier with the difference between writing for primary and writing sort of older materials. I guess with primary materials as well, with adults, there's sort of a one size fits all approach, I guess. It's like, this is an adult ELT book. We don't sort of put them into age groups. With primary, I guess it's different, isn't it? Because you would have those different stages. I think you said 6 levels. So what are sort of the groups that they put the ages together in? Would it be sort of 4, 5, 6-year-olds all together?
There are differences in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in Spain, where I am, traditionally they've looked at the age groups in terms of 2 years at a time.
Okay.
So cycles, so 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6,
mm-hmm.
and then within that 1 and 2, there will also be a progress, a development. But it depends a little bit. There are, if you look at because the problem, of course, with English, or the challenge, I should say, is that we need to look at the age
mm-hmm.
level, and then we need to look at the language level. So you might find, I mean, in theory, mostly, the lower the age, the lower the language level. Yeah. So we start off at a pre-A1, if you like,
mm-hmm.
Looking at the Common European Framework, which is usually the reference we use. But sometimes we have a situation where the language level is lower than it depends on the country. So sometimes some children in some countries might have been learning English in preschool or infant school,
mm-hmm.
for example. So they've already got a basis. Or some private schools might be having more hours of English.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is another big difference. So it's not usually one size fits all, as you say. So what usually happens in terms of publishing is that I think there's a growing trend to create course books that are specific for a particular region or a particular country.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean to say that that book can't be used somewhere else and maybe tweaked. Yeah. We do a lot of tweaking these years. I mean, what we tend to do is write one book for one market, and then bring out a different version for another market, where we either simplify the level, lower the level, reduce the content, add content and increase the level. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of work after writing one course in creating these other courses, which will be for other markets. So it's, and even within a class, I mean, one of the big things that I'm an advocate of, and I think all primary people I know, if you like, writers or teachers, are offering choice. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing about choice theory and even the illusion of choice sometimes. But so I always build that into my materials, mm-hmm. so that teachers can, even though I've got an idea in my head of what this class is going to look like, there might be in one context, maybe more than half of the class have some kind of extra issue that we need to take into account. So for example, a task might be, the end of a learning task might be, in order to show the learning, we might say, write a sentence, mm-hmm. but we could also then say, record yourself saying a sentence, or draw a picture to show that you've understood this particular. So providing choices, also in terms of word count or something like that. So, some children might be able to write whole sentences, some might not. So then we can give them a, label something instead of write, there is a tree, they can just write tree and an arrow. So you can use, it's quite easy, I think, to use the same content, and then to offer different levels, if you like, within that same content, or extra challenge or extra support, we usually call it.
Yeah, that's really, really good idea, actually. Yeah, like you said, having the outcome of the activity the same, but just providing different ways to do it, definitely. So that's a really, really good piece of advice. Would you have any other advice for teachers creating their own primary materials, or perhaps published materials writers when they're writing primary materials?
I think I think the most important thing to bear in mind is that we should never speak down to children.
Mm-hmm.
I think mostly we don't. Those of us working in this, we don't. But I do come across it, and if anything, we should speak after them. We not speak down to them. And there's a quote by a writer. I can't remember the name now, but it'll come to me. So we need to make sure that when they open the books, or when they get their handout, or whatever, or look on the screen and see the materials, they don't immediately think, oh, what? That's babyish.
Yeah.
Or that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one key piece of advice is that if you are using an image in the materials, and you should use images for primary materials, because they need, I've never seen any good primary materials without images, put it that way. And these can be photographs, or they can be illustrations, they can be any kind of image. But if there are people in the image, if there is a child in the image, and there usually is. So usually, for example, if we're talking about I don't know, clothes, there'll be a picture of a child dressed in whatever clothes vocabulary that's being taught. It's very important that that child is either the same age as the children using the materials, or a bit older.
Okay.
A bit older is good. So if it's for 5 and 6 year olds, the child might be 7 or 8, or it's like an aspiration thing. It's like, can you imagine? If you're 7 and you open a book and there are pictures of 5-year-olds, you think, oh, this is baby stuff. So that's really really important to keep in mind.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
And then I think children are naturally curious anyway, so to not tap into that would be foolish. Yeah. And they like playing with words, they like puzzles, they like working things out, and then feeling that kind of satisfaction with having arrived at a conclusion through some visual clues or whatever. So they like drama, they like music, they like writing I think when you write materials for children, you should imagine. I always, when I start writing, imagine myself in the classroom with the children, and I think to myself, how would I teach this? How would I practice this?
Yeah.
How would I recycle this? What might be fun here? How could I add some humor? How could I make this engaging? And actually, do imagine it really. And that's when if you've got a class, obviously you can try things out. And I would say, if you haven't got a class, I don't know many or any teachers who wouldn't be happy to invite somebody into their classroom to give a lesson for 30 minutes or whatever, to try some stuff out, or ask people, can you try out these materials and let me know if there's anything I've missed or got wrong.
That's quite good, isn't it? Because then you can see, like, you might think something works, but then it's also how another teacher would pick it up and use it for themselves as well.
Yeah. And also teachers, I've had some of my very best ideas for writing from teachers who are in the classroom, who've said, oh, we could do this. So I remember once, some years back, I visited a school in Barcelona where they were trialing some of our materials for a book, and they were doing they had a particular unit they were doing, and then afterwards I was speaking with the teachers, and one of them said something that she was doing after this, this, after using the class book and the workbook, she was doing this particular thing with I thought, that, why didn't I think of that? It was such an obvious thing to be doing. Basically what she was doing was it was all about what's in my school bag. Okay. Yeah, it was teaching classroom objects, etc., etc. There was a whole thing about at the time going on in Spain, and it might have been happening in other countries, that complaints by parents because their children's school bags were so heavy with so many books.
Oh gosh.
And what she was doing, she was going through all this with the materials and teaching them what all the vocabulary, and it was I've got, I haven't got, that was the language. And then what she was doing afterwards, she was actually weighing the school bags and putting them in order from the heaviest to the lightest. And it was just such a fun thing to do because the children loved it, and it was just an extra add-on, if you like. That's just one tiny example of where teachers, they've got loads of things up their sleeves that, Definitely. There should be more collaboration, I think, between teachers and materials writers. Well, I think all teachers are materials writers anyway. I always say that. Mm-hmm. I don't know a teacher who doesn't create something for their own classes, but there should be, or there could be. It would be nice if there was more interaction and sharing of ideas and asking questions. Yeah.
So a lot of the activities that we're sort of discussing are quite physical activities. They get the learners up, moving around, perhaps, using some realia in the classroom as well. But sometimes they might be sort of like not a heads down approach, but they might have to try and write a word or something. Are there any activities you think work particularly well with that process in mind?
Oh yeah, definitely. So there are some typical activities that work well. So for example, after when children are starting to get little texts, so they start reading, then things like odd one out is quite a good one. So you might have a little text about somebody's daily routines, for example, and then the odd one out might be, things like images of activities that come up in I'm just thinking off the top of my head now, but an odd one out comprehension is a good one because they can be pictures, or they can be words, or they can be things like that. Ordering as well. Okay. There are a lot of tasks like ordering, classifying, categorizing, where the children need to think about the meaning of the word and then how it relates to something else. It's I think we're always trying to relate things to something else, because that's how they learn and remember. So ordering things, classifying things, and there's a great activity that I've done with children and which I've put into books where they classify a group of objects any way they like, and there's no right or wrong answer.
Okay, just to see how they would categorize and what they associate.
And then they justify it. So it might be something simple, so they might classify according to color, or according to topic, or according to how many letters in the word. So if it's a 3, so cat and egg would be in the same group because they have 3 letters, but they might be in separate groups to somebody else because it's an animal and something to eat. So I think like word puzzles and play is really important. And then I think on the page again, when the children are using, heads down, as you said, is there needs to be the right amount of support on the page. I would say that if you're writing materials for your own classes and they're for primary, I would say that you should always have either a model or an example answer for everything, because one child will get it, well, adults do the same actually, but you might write instructions on the board, you might explain, somebody's distracted, they're not listening, whatever. It needs to be on the page so that they've got a reference, they've got support. We're not testing them. We're trying to get them to visually see how the language works. We use a lot of color coding. So we might have, if we're teaching a grammar point, it's a good idea to have some example sentences on the page with the key parts of the sentence highlighted in some way. So we use color or circle things, and then we can teach it by replacing keywords. Yeah. So so for example, if it's I like eggs, I don't like bread, we can highlight the eggs and bread so that we can show that they can be removed. And they can be changed. So it's I think we need to think of the senses there that make it really kind of holistic, and and not just here's a text and rhymes, songs, chants, all this kind of thing, playing with the sound. That's how children learn. One piece of advice that I would give to anybody writing primary materials would be get access to some children. Or, if they might be your neighbours, they might be yours, they might be in a school, they might be, just watch them, observe them, talk to them, see what they're doing. I think I was once given a presentation at a conference in Malta a few years back, and I was speaking kind of spontaneously, and somebody, I didn't realize I'd said it, but somebody tweeted something I'd said, and it's come around a few times now, and I've been quoted as saying it, and what I said was, if you teach children and you're not surprised on a daily basis, then you're doing something wrong. And I maintain that, every time I talk to children, see what you're doing, what you got there, and they make me, they surprise me, and I think, oh gosh, and just interact with children, or watch some children's TV, read some children's storybooks, picture books, try and get into their heads, because we make assumptions. Adults, definitely. As a general rule, we think, oh yeah, children are going to like that, and then they don't, because that's not what they like.
Definitely, especially if you haven't been, like you said, around children for a long time. When I first started teaching, I only taught primary learners, and we used to do it was summer camps mostly, but we used to do like song circles and dancing and singing and acting and fashion shows and all these things. And because I haven't done that for so long, I think that's why now I would find it very hard to get back in that headspace, because that was maybe 6-7 years ago, and things have changed so much, so you definitely have to spend time with the people that you're writing the materials for, for sure. Do you think sometimes it's quite good to create a narrative within a lesson as well, particularly for the younger primary learners, so that they can follow it through and sort of feel engaged with the characters on the page?
Oh gosh, yeah, and storytelling and the whole. Absolutely. The key though is to find a narrative, a story that will appeal to all of the children. That's but there's a lot of fantastic work being done in this, with the picture book, the PEPELT group, which is Sandy Moreau, Gail Ellis, and a third person who I apologize doesn't come to me right away, but they've got a website, and they've been doing a lot of work in highlighting how we can use picture books, storybooks with children, activities, taking on roles, rewriting, engaging, etc. That it's brilliant. That's I think, all the course books that I've written for primary have had stories running through them. It's my favorite. It's actually my favorite part of the process, writing the stories. As a writer, it's quite complex because you want a good story, and you've got this language to use, and sometimes if you're writing revision stories, you've got two sets of language to use, because the revision section might come after every second unit. So you might have two very different types of language, vocabulary and grammar, and you have to marry those two and put them into a story and make it credible and make it a real story and make it fun. And it's like, I always describe it, it's like doing a huge jigsaw puzzle, and all the pieces are everywhere and there's a piece missing, and then you have to try again, and then when it works, it's just wonderful, especially when you go, well, if for a publisher, you come up with your story, you write little sketches for what you want on the page and to see how much fits, and then you send all that off, and the editors do their work, etc., and then the illustrators work their magic, and it comes back, and you think, wow. And that's when, it's one of the most satisfying moments for a primary writer, I think, is when you see how your imagined pages, especially with stories, are, come to life.
Definitely.
Yeah. I've been almost in tears sometimes when I've seen, I thought, she's got it. She's got my idea. She's made it better. She's, the characters or all kinds of things. It's really exciting when that happens.
Yeah. So you mentioned one website just a moment ago, and we'll put a link up to that with the episode as well. But do you know of any other sort of perhaps teacher websites with good examples of primary materials, or any other places where people can find some good primary materials to download?
I think the British Council websites for learning materials. So teaching English, British Council Teaching English website.
Yeah.
I write materials for them sometimes, but I'm not saying it because of that. I'm saying it because they have got quality assurance, if you like. There'll be nothing on that website that is not good quality in terms, you won't find any errors. Because there's a lot of stuff out there where you think, oh gosh, there's spelling mistakes, or they're just things that are wrong. So it's for consistently good stuff, if you like, the British Council website. Also, they've got things, if you go to the website, you can do a search. So you can do primary materials, and then you can do a search within the primary materials by topic, by grammar, etc. And I would say that what they do is they might have a lesson plan with some worksheets or with something online. Most of the stuff we've worked on recently have got both types of materials. So they've got the print materials that you print off, or they've got digital materials. And they are a good model to follow, I think, if you are a new writer.
Yeah.
Because they've got, we always follow a kind of guide, if you like. We might go off on a tangent sometimes, but there'll be the material. The whole way it's done makes it easy to copy and to mimic. It's not copyrighted in terms of the progress that is the sequence of activities, if you like, and that's a great place to go. And they've got flashcards, stories, songs, projects, all kinds of things. Yeah. That's a great place, and it's free. Okay, so that's I should say that's the most important thing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the free sites that I've come across aren't consistent in that level of quality. So that for me is a problem, because I don't like to recommend a site and then have a teacher maybe with a lowish level of English not realizing that something that they've taken and downloaded is actually flawed. So
True.
that's a problem. ELT Songs is a newish company, and I've worked for them as well. But there's a great team of workers with them. What they're doing, they're creating materials for primary which are all based on songs, and they're aligned with the young learner exams for Cambridge. So you know if your children are starter level, mover level, flyer level, whatever, that the materials fall into those ranges. And Fiona Hunter, I've seen some of her materials recently. She's based in Spain too, and she creates huge packages of materials that go with stories. So she'll have a story. Sometimes it might be a traditional story, Goldilocks and the Three Bears or whatever. Sometimes it might be a storybook that she's come across and thinks is good to use as a starting point. And then she creates around that worksheets, projects, all kinds of things. And the quality of her stuff is top class. So I would recommend that. So that's 3 there. Also, a lot of the writers, successful primary writers, Carol Reed is one of the people she taught me years back, and I've got every admiration for the work she does. So she's got a website too, and she offers advice. So if you Googled her name, you could find some of her materials that she provides and shares sometimes. Maybe sometimes a good idea is to look at who are the key writers and key players producing materials, and then see what they've got. The young learners, YLT, Young Learners and Teenagers SIG for IATEFL, that's a good place to go on their Facebook page, for example, and ask for advice, because they've got a really great team of volunteers. And I know that and the materials right in SIG for IATEFL as well. If you go to the Facebook group or whatever and you ask a question, you'll get lots of people giving advice. So I think it's always good to, if you're looking for something, to ask in those places, then you'll get a recommendation, and then you'll know that it's something is good.
And of course, your ELT Teacher to Write a Book, How to Write Primary Materials as well.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody who wanted to buy that, I think the best thing to do is actually two things. Either go to the ELT Teacher to Write a website, and you've got a list of places you can buy it from. Or what I would probably do myself is Google it to see which options come up in your area, if you like, because it's different, depending on where you live. If you're in Brazil or Uruguay, there might be options that they aren't the same.
So we have a couple of listener questions. We've touched on one of them. One of them was, how can we make primary materials engaging and age appropriate? But I think we've covered that. So one that we do have is, as a materials writer, do you need to specialise in writing primary materials? Or would you say it's possible to write primary some of the time and then maybe something like exam materials at other times?
I think this is a really good question, actually. I think that very few people specialise in one specific age group, or if you're a very experienced and successful writer in one area, like Carol Reed, who we've just mentioned, then she or everything she writes has a primary focus. But actually, she's just started writing pre-primary and infants. But most of the writers I know, and myself included, we write materials for a whole range of age groups. And I think it very much depends on our experience as teachers. If you want to be a materials writer, there is nothing to stop you writing different types of materials. You don't need to have a niche if you like. You can. I think these days, though, you're probably going to, if you want to work full time in this field, you would probably have to write various kinds of writing.
True.
I've written for adults, for teenagers, for primary. I've written exam materials. I've written a course for oil and gas workers. Yeah.
And if people want to find out more about you, where can they reach you or find out more about what you're doing as well?
I've just started my very first blog. I used to blog and still blog for other people, National Geographic, British Council, etc. But I've got my own blog now.
Nice.
And website.
Yeah.
And it's called creatingeltmaterials.com.
Perfect.
So it's basically in that blog I'm writing about writing. The idea is that it's to help teachers who want to write materials, maybe other writers. I'm kind of writing different series of blog posts. So I write about my own week in writing and things I might learn along the way. I'm going to write a kind of A to Z of writing, if you like. So, you know, A might be for accessibility or whatever. It's great fun, actually, because if you've got your own blog, you can write what you like, can't you?
Exactly.
So it's...
Yeah, I enjoy seeing your LinkedIn post, your daily LinkedIn post, and the questions as well. I love reading sort of the input from the other teachers and writers as well, just because you feel as if it's like, I don't know about you, but when I go on LinkedIn in the morning, I feel like as if it's my sort of coffee break, and you go on and you feel like you're socialising, even though it's just reading what other people are saying. And I find that on your post, so thank you for that.
I love it. Do you know, I used to hate LinkedIn. I used to think, oh no, LinkedIn, it's not nice. It's, you know, it's not for me. And then I thought I need to embrace it. So I look at it differently now, and I love it now.
Yeah.
And I love the, so I get an idea, you know, at the moment I'm doing 10 quotes about creativity. And one I had recently, a question about, you know, which book would you recommend, etc. And it's brilliant because the dialogue that comes afterwards, if you like. I'm just learning. I've got a little post-its everywhere with books I need to check up on, or, you know, it's conversations, isn't it?
Definitely. It feels like a social space for people working at home. It's strange.
Yeah, there are quite a few people who are. I feel like as a writer, as a freelance writer, and I don't go out to do much work or any at the moment, but it's a way of having that connection and
definitely.
You know, just getting ideas and sharing experiences, or having a moan sometimes, you know, so that's okay too. So if anyone's listening to this, and, you know, please join us on LinkedIn and, you know, join in the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time and your expertise, and for all the advice that you've given as well. As I say, we'll put links to all of the websites you mentioned, and also your Teacher to Write a Book and your blog as well, so people can access those. And thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Speak soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to our episode today. We'll be sharing the links Kath mentioned on our LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook pages, so make sure you're following us for those. It's ELT CPD, all one word. In our next episode, we'll be speaking about how to write classroom materials. Thanks again for listening. Bye.